Imagine breaking your arm, right?
Oh, ouch. Yeah.
Yeah, you go to the hospital, you get an x-ray, and the doctor's, slides that film onto the light board, and there is just this jagged white line right across the bone.
Right. It's right there in front of you.
Exactly. The doctor points to it, you look at it, and, honestly, there is an immediate, profound psychological comfort in that moment.
Because it's tangible.
Yes. The damage is binary, it's visible, it's categorized, you're injured, here is the proof, and here is the exact cast we are going to build to fix it.
Yeah, we really crave that visual validation, don't we?
We do.
Like, the human brain just wants diagnostics to be a matter of empirical evidence.
Yeah.
If something is broken, we want to see the fracture.
Right. But then you step into the world of professional writing.
Oh, boy.
You step into this deeply internal psychology of, creating an entire universe from absolute nothingness. And suddenly you realize that X-ray machine just does not exist.
It's totally gone. You're flying blind.
You are navigating this diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky, it's wildly subjective, and it's just incredibly unforgiving. And I really want to start by looking right at you, the listener, and acknowledging a hard, sobering reality here.
It's a tough one.
It is. The murkiness of this process is exactly why 80% of writers quit before they ever see success.
80%.
80%. 8 out of 10 people trying to do this will eventually walk away.
Yeah, that attrition rate is just staggering. And it functions as this quiet, almost invisible crisis within the creative community,
Absolutely.
Because, it highlights a fundamental misunderstanding of why writers actually fail. The vast majority of that 80%, they don't quit because they lack imagination.
Right.
Or because they don't have an interesting story to tell. They quit because the internal friction of the drafting process, combined with the external friction of the publishing world.
Of the publishing world.
Right.
Yeah.
It just grinds their psychological resilience down to a fine powder until they simply cannot take another step.
They quit because they just don't have the tools to navigate the dark. But that is exactly why we are doing this deep dive today. We are unpacking the June 2026 compilation of the Write Well newsletter.
Such a good issue.
It really is. And I want to be clear about this. This isn't, it's not some listicle of basic grammar tips.
Yeah, so.
It is a comprehensive survival guide. It's really a masterclass in the psychological, structural, and physical realities of being a working writer.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff, but necessary.
Exactly. So our whole mission for this deep dive is to extract the actionable advice and those insider strategies from this newsletter so that you can stay in that top 20%. We are here to arm you with the frameworks you need to keep writing, keep earning, and survive that friction.
Yeah, and what makes this specific compilation so remarkably effective is, its holistic approach.
Right.
We are going to examine the literal internal psychology
Yeah.
of getting a first draft onto the page.
Which is the hardest part.
Usually, yeah. And from there, we'll move into the structural mechanics of how to shape real-life events into actual compelling narratives and how to manipulate the musicality of prose to literally control a reader's nervous system.
I love that.
Just fascinating. We'll decode the secret geometry of writing compelling, non-romantic relationships. And finally, we'll confront the physical and mental maintenance required to keep the writer themselves from breaking down.
Mind, body, and soul.
Exactly. It's an exploration of the complete ecosystem of a sustainable, creative life.
So the most natural place to start that exploration is at the absolute beginning of the work, right? The blank page. And what the newsletter identifies as the permissions problem.
Yes, the permissions problem.
Because before you can even worry about publishing, you have to actually generate the material. And one of the most brilliant recurring motifs in this Write Well issue is how it anchors these very nebulous psychological struggles in the concrete history of Latin root words.
I love that they did that. The etymology grounds the abstract concept so beautifully.
It really does.
So the first root they dissect is foundational to this entire problem. The word is revise.
Revise, yeah.
Because in modern creative culture, that word has undergone a massive semantic shift, hasn't it? A writer will sit down and say, I'm going to revise my draft. And what they usually mean is, I'm going to fix my typos.
Right. They mean they're going to proofread.
Exactly. But if we break the word down to its origins, it comes from the Latin prefix re, meaning again.
And the verb videre, meaning to see.
Yes, literally, to see again. to look at a thing a second time with totally new eyes.
It's so interesting when you think about the Videre family in the English language because it's expansive and it's deeply tied to comprehension, like
Yeah.
vision, visible.
To provide is to see ahead and prepare.
To supervise is to see from above.
An interview is quite literally to see between two people.
Wow, yeah. So when we apply this original literal definition to the writing process, it forces a massive paradigm shift.
It really does.
Revision is not a custodial task. It doesn't mean to polish or to smooth out or to correct grammar. It means to re-envision the entire structure.
And here is the profound mechanical conflict that trips everybody up. A writer cannot possibly re-envision a structure while they are simultaneously trying to build it for the first time.
Right, that's impossible.
You cannot be deep inside the first looking, that generative, messy state of pulling a world out of the ether and simultaneously maintain the critical, elevated distance required for a second looking.
The two cognitive states are just mutually exclusive.
Exactly. Which brings us to the psychological framework that Dorothea Brande established all the way back in her 1934 book, Becoming a Writer.
Such a classic.
It's astonishing how accurate her diagnosis remains almost a century later.
Yeah.
She basically argued that the fundamental crisis of the author is that there are two entirely distinct, often antagonistic personalities residing inside a single mind.
Right. First, you have the creator.
The creator.
And the creator is the architect of the first looking. They're dreamy, intuitive, highly sensitive, and inherently childlike,
Yeah, very much so.
The creator is the part of the subconscious that just hears a line of dialogue out of nowhere or sees a vivid image of a room and just rushes to get the raw material onto the page.
And crucially, the creator does not care about quality.
Not at all.
The creator operates purely in a flow state, just completely unbothered by chaotic sentences, plot holes, or, structural collapse.
But then lurking in the periphery, you have the judge.
Ah, the judge.
Yeah, the judge is the adult in the room. This personality is workmanlike, analytical, ruthless, and entirely ego-driven.
Yeah, the judge is the one who reads a paragraph and immediately evaluates it against the pantheon of great literature, right?
Oh, always comparing. This isn't Hemingway.
Exactly. The judge looks at the creator's raw output and says, that adjective is flabby, this pacing is atrocious, and this entire chapter is just a self-indulgent cliche.
But the reality is, a professional writer desperately needs both of these personalities to survive.
Oh, absolutely.
Without the creator's untethered intuition, the manuscript is basically a corpse, right? It might be technically flawless, but it lacks any emotional pulse or originality.
Yeah, it's just dead on the page.
But without the judge's analytical ruthlessness, the manuscript remains this unreadable, chaotic brain dump. They are both essential.
Essential, yes. But the defining rule of a sustainable writing practice is that they cannot be allowed in the room at the same time.
Never.
When they're forced to coexist, the writing process paralyzes. And this is the root cause of what we lazily call writer's block.
Writer's block, right.
It is almost never a lack of talent.
Yeah.
And it's rarely a genuine lack of ideas. It is a boundary violation.
A boundary violation. I love that phrasing.
Yeah, it's a permissions problem.
Yeah.
You have allowed the hypercritical judge to infiltrate the room during the creator's highly vulnerable generative time.
It makes me think about the mechanics of building a sandcastle on a beach.
Oh, okay, let's hear it.
So you are the creator, right? You're digging massive moats. You're slapping wet sand on top of wet sand. You're completely covered in mud, lost in the sheer joyful play of construction.
Sounds fun.
It is. But now imagine a rigid, clipboard-wielding structural engineer,
Oh, no.
which is the judge, standing directly over your shoulder. Every time you happily dump a bucket of sand, the engineer sighs loudly and points out that the load-bearing integrity of your left turret is mathematically compromised.
Right. And the moat isn't a perfect geometric circle.
Exactly. Wouldn't keep building. The joy evaporates instantly.
You just drop the plastic shovel and walk away.
Yeah.
The flow state shatters completely.
Yeah.
And the newsletter illustrates this extreme fragility of the creator with a deeply poignant childhood memory.
Oh, this part broke my heart a little.
Me too. So the author recalls being a young girl sitting on the floor playing with her dolls. She is completely immersed in the make-believe, acting out the narrative, doing the voices, entirely lost in the world she is building.
Just totally in the zone.
Totally. And then her mother casually sticks her head into the bedroom and, with this teasing smile, just asks, "Who are you talking to?"
It's such a seemingly innocuous comment, right? There is absolutely no malice in it.
None. But the psychological impact on the child is devastating.
Mm.
spell is broken,
Yeah.
the child suddenly becomes hyper-aware of being observed,
Mm.
the play feels foolish, embarrassing, so the child stops talking, puts the dolls down, and the generative world instantly collapses.
And that rush of sudden, paralyzing self-consciousness, that is the exact neurological event that happens when your internal judge interrupts your drafting session.
Yes, exactly.
You write a raw, vulnerable sentence right from the heart, and the judge immediately sneers, "Who are you talking to?" Nobody wants to read that sentimental garbage.
And the creator just shuts down.
Instantly, you end up endlessly tweaking the same opening paragraph for 3 hours, desperately trying to appease the judge, and you make absolutely zero forward progress on the actual manuscript.
So the actionable mandate here is aggressive boundary setting. To get the raw material onto the page, the judge cannot just be asked to, like, sit quietly in the corner.
No, no. The judge must be locked completely out of the building.
Completely.
No.
You have to set a physical timer for 20 or 30 minutes and give yourself explicit written permission to write the absolute worst, most embarrassing sentences of your entire life.
I tell people this all the time. You have to accept that the creator is merely shoveling the wet sand into a pile.
Right. The judge will get their dedicated time later to carve that pile into a castle.
But we have to make a very sharp distinction here regarding that later revision stage, because once the draft is finished and the internal judge is finally invited back into the room, the dynamic shifts entirely.
It really does. And the source material makes a fascinating, highly aggressive pivot here regarding the unwritten contract between a writer and an external publishing house editor.
Yeah, this is a crucial clarification because there is this pervasive myth among developing writers about what external editors actually do.
Oh, tell me about it.
The assumption is often, well, I got the story down, it's a bit messy, I know the middle sags, and I have a terrible habit of comma splicing. But hey, that's what I pay a professional copy editor for, right? To come in like a janitor and clean up my messy genius.
And the newsletter addresses that assumption with a delightful level of hostility.
So hostile.
It literally states, no, 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 no.
I highlighted that entire section.
It's so good
Mm.
because it is a fundamental violation of the professional contract. Your internal judge, your personal grueling revision process has one singular mandate: to make the manuscript the absolute best you can possibly make it before another human being ever sees it.
Right. If I submit a draft knowing that Chapter 4 is structurally weak, or knowing that I left lazy syntax on the page because I just, didn't feel like putting in the hours to fix it, I am not collaborating with an editor.
No, you're not.
I am turning them into a demolition crew when what I really need is an interior designer.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize the damage. Yeah. An external editor's true value lies in their objective distance. They are highly trained professionals whose job is to see the macro-level flaws that you are literally blind to because you have been living inside the manuscript for 2 years.
Right.
They are supposed to spot the fact that the protagonist's motivation in Act 2 completely contradicts their actions in Act 3. They are supposed to see the fatal pacing issues in the climax.
But if that brilliant external editor opens the manuscript and immediately has to start fixing your lazy comma splices, your passive verbs, and the dangling modifiers that your internal judge willfully ignored,
They get bogged down.
yeah, their cognitive bandwidth is entirely consumed by the micro. They are spending all their mental energy weeding your front lawn, which means they are going to miss the fact that the foundation of the house is actively cracking.
Exactly. The internal judge must be utterly ruthless so that the external editor is free to be visionary.
Ruthless so they can be visionary. That's the quote right there.
The external editor cannot diagnose the deep structural rot if you have buried it under a layer of easily fixable surface trash.
Right. So the daily discipline of professional writing is knowing exactly which self belongs in the chair at which time. The creator generates the raw material, the judge refines and structures that material, and the external editor elevates the structure.
If you collapse those distinct roles, the work just fails.
Okay, so once you have mastered the psychology of locking the judge out to generate the raw material and then bringing the judge back in to refine it, you face an entirely new crisis.
Always a new crisis.
Always. You look at this massive pile of material you've generated, especially if you are drawing heavily from your own lived experiences, and you have to figure out how to shape it.
Which requires looking at the raw material from a profound distance. And this introduces our next Latin root from the newsletter: retrospect.
Retrospect.
It stems from retro, meaning backward, and specter, meaning to look at, literally to look backward.
And the spec family is it's the lens through which we process reality. Like a prospect is looking forward.
To inspect is to look deeply into something.
To suspect is to look from below with distrust. Even the spectacles on our faces are instruments of seeing.
Right. So for anyone attempting to write a memoir, an essay collection, or even heavily autobiographical fiction, retrospect is the mandatory working posture.
Yeah.
You are no longer the person frantically living the chaotic events. You are the architect looking back at them across this chasm of time.
I think the source material refers to this temporal distance as the ultimate gift to the writer.
The ultimate gift.
Yeah.
Because without the emotional cooling that comes from retrospective distance, you are not writing a narrative. You are merely publishing your journal.
And this demand for retrospective distance collides head-on with a massive anxiety that I see paralyze so many developing writers. I hear this all the time. They say, I want to write a memoir. I have things I want to say about the human condition. But my life isn't a Hollywood blockbuster.
Right, I'm boring.
Yeah. I haven't survived a high-profile cult. I haven't summited Mount Everest. I wasn't kidnapped by international pirates. Why would anyone pay money to read about my deeply average middle-class existence?
It is a totally rational fear,
Yeah.
but it is built on a completely false premise. The newsletter delivers this deeply counterintuitive truth here. Individuals who have survived dramatically interesting or extreme lives often produce incredibly boring books.
Wait, really? Boring books?
Often, yes. And the mechanism behind that failure is fascinating. When someone has survived a pirate kidnapping or a Himalayan avalanche, they often rely entirely on the intrinsic shock value of the events to carry the book.
I see.
They assume the drama of the facts will do all the heavy lifting. But a life lived, even an extreme one, is just a random, chaotic sequence of things happening one after another.
Exactly. To illustrate this, the source uses a really brilliant contrast. Consider a woman who has worked as a kindergarten teacher for 40 years. If she sits down and writes a book that is strictly a chronological log of her career, like, in 1998, we transitioned from finger paints to macaroni art. In 1999, we survived a district-wide lice outbreak. You will abandon the book by chapter 2.
Right, because it's just an uncurated sequence of events. It is basically data entry.
Yes. But if that exact same kindergarten teacher sifts through those 40 years, finds the retrospective distance, and writes a memoir focusing exclusively on the one specific 9-month school year where she had to teach, discipline, and support a 5-year-old child whose mother was actively dying of terminal cancer.
Oh, wow.
Right? That book will absolutely devastate you. It will top the bestseller lists.
Because the emotional resonance of a memoir has absolutely nothing to do with the epic scope of the life lived. It has everything to do with the precise focus of the writer's lens. And this is the core thesis of Vivian Gornick's seminal 2001 book, The Situation and the Story. Gornick basically argues that developing writers fundamentally confuse these two elements. The situation is the factual reality of what happened, but the story is the profound, larger sense the writer eventually makes of what happened.
The situation is the raw data. The story is the philosophical meaning extracted from that data. Let's look at the psychology of a divorce, for example.
Yeah.
You can have two different writers go through the exact same situation. A brutal, drawn-out, financially ruinous divorce. The first writer, lacking retrospective distance, sits down and produces this wounded, bitter, deeply chronological recital of grievances. He hid these assets, then she manipulated the children, then the mediator said this unfair thing.
Right, it's an extended venting session on paper. It's a deposition, not a narrative.
Exactly. But the second writer takes that exact same situation, steps back, and realizes the divorce is just the setting. The actual story is a deep introspective meditation on what it means to tie your identity to another person, to love someone badly, and to realize you were loved badly in return.
So good.
The first writer is still entirely trapped inside the situation, but the second writer has transcended the situation to find the universal story.
And to successfully build that universal story, you need structural architecture.
Yeah.
You need load-bearing walls.
Yeah.
Which leads to one of the most vital insights in this compilation. Memoirs require the exact same rigid plot skeleton as genre fiction.
And this is a point of massive resistance for literary writers. They want their real life to just organically flow onto the page, but readers are biologically wired to expect a specific structural rhythm when they consume narrative.
Right.
If you don't provide the skeleton, the emotional flesh of your life simply collapses into a puddle.
Yet the beats are non-negotiable. You begin with the protagonist, which, in memoir, is the author existing in their ordinary world. On the surface, there is an obvious, tangible problem. But buried beneath that, there's a hidden psychological need. a fundamental flaw or wound they are blind to.
And then the architecture demands an inciting incident. The phone call in the middle of the night, the medical diagnosis, the sudden betrayal that irreversibly shatters the ordinary world and launches the narrative trajectory.
Which must be followed by a rising action consisting of at least three major complications. The protagonist makes bad decisions based on their hidden flaw, their allies fail them, the situation worsens.
It just escalates.
Exactly. This escalation inevitably leads to the bleakest moment, the dark night of the soul, where the old way of living is completely destroyed and all seems lost.
And it is only in that crucible that a helper arrives, often someone entirely unexpected, forcing the protagonist to learn a fundamental lesson.
They make a crucial, proactive decision based on that new wisdom, and they emerge in the resolution permanently, irreversibly changed. If you map the architecture of any culturally defining memoir, those exact structural bones are holding the entire thing up.
But understanding that architecture brings a writer to a very tricky ethical fork in the road. When you're drawing from your own life, what is the fundamental difference in the contract you make with a reader when you label the book a memoir versus labeling it fiction?
Well, it is entirely about the burden of factual truth versus emotional truth. The contract of a memoir is absolute fidelity to the situational facts.
Right.
Now, the publishing industry grants a tiny bit of pragmatic leeway. You can compress a 2-month timeline into a single week for pacing, or you can composite 3 minor acquaintances into a single character, so the reader isn't overwhelmed with 50 different names. But you cannot invent the architecture.
Precisely. If your real-life divorce ended in a messy, unresolved whimper without a beautiful epiphany, you cannot staple a fake, triumphant redemption arc onto the final chapter of your memoir just to satisfy the plot skeleton.
No, you can't.
The unwritten contract is, I am telling you the unflattering, factual reality of what happened.
But fiction operates under a completely different, almost opposite contract. Fiction gives you permission to aggressively alter the literal facts in order to more perfectly reveal the emotional truth.
Right, because facts can sometimes obscure the truth.
Exactly. If your real-life ending was chaotic and obscured the profound lesson you learned, fiction allows you to invent an entirely new, deeply satisfying climax that perfectly distills that emotional reality into a single scene.
The newsletter actually points out that many of our greatest novels are essentially thinly veiled autobiography. Like Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird is a heavy reshaping of her own Alabama childhood.
Or Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. It's a near-direct transcription of her own psychological descent.
Right. They didn't label these works memoirs. They changed the names, the timelines, and the settings to protect the guilty or to streamline the theme. But the emotional truth at the core of the fiction remains staggeringly real.
So if your lived experience naturally fits the architectural skeleton, write the memoir. If the facts are messy but the emotional resonance is profound, change the facts and write the novel.
Okay, so we have the psychological discipline to generate the draft, and we have the structural blueprint to shape the narrative. But a blueprint doesn't build a house, and a skeleton doesn't breathe.
No, it doesn't.
To make the story actually move, we have to zoom in from the macro architecture to the microscopic level of the sentence. We have to look at the words themselves.
This is where writing ceases to be architecture and really becomes music. The compilation calls this the conductor's batina, and it introduces the Latin root cadence,
Which stems from cadere, meaning to fall.
Yes. In musical and linguistic terms, cadence is the way a sequence of sounds descends to its natural resting place. It is the gravitational pull of a sentence as it lands on the period.
That cadere root is hidden everywhere in English, isn't it? Usually implying a downward trajectory, like a cascade is a dramatic falling of water.
Decay is the slow falling away of organic matter. Deciduous trees are those whose leaves fall in autumn.
Even the word accident literally translates to something that falls upon you unexpectedly.
Right. So for a writer, mastering cadence is the difference between a reader devouring a book in one sitting and a reader abandoning it on an airplane. The legendary science fiction and fantasy author Ursula K. Le Guin captured this perfectly in her craft book, Steering the Craft.
Oh, I love that book.
It's so good. She wrote that beneath the memory, beneath the imagination, and even beneath the actual meaning of the words themselves, lies the rhythmic structure of the language.
Rhythm is the basement foundation of the entire house.
Yeah.
If you get the subconscious pulse of the prose wrong, the grandest philosophical ideas and the most intricate plot twists will simply bounce off the reader's brain.
Because reading is not just intellectual data transfer, it is a physiological experience.
Think about the physics of driving a car. Imagine you are reading a manuscript where the author has constructed every single sentence to be exactly 14 words long. Subject, verb, object, prepositional phrase, over and over again.
Sounds awful.
It is. Reading that prose is the exact neurological equivalent of driving a car on a perfectly flat, arrow-straight highway in the middle of Nebraska, with the cruise control locked at exactly 45 miles per hour. For 6 hours. What happens to the driver?
Highway hypnosis sets in. The brain recognizes the repetitive, unchanging pattern of the stimulus and determines that it no longer needs to actively process the environment. The driver's eyes glaze over, the conscious mind checks out, and they stop registering the scenery altogether.
The reader's brain literally habituates to the metronome of the prose and falls asleep. The eye is scanning the words, but the comprehension has flatlined.
So to keep the reader awake, the writer has to shatter the metronome. They have to act like a composer, deliberately manipulating tempo and volume to control the reader's heart rate.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of tempo. Long, flowing, multi-clause sentences act like whole notes in a musical score. Because the eye has to track so much information before reaching a punctuation mark, the sentence naturally decelerates the reader's internal pacing.
Yeah, these luxurious sentences are the perfect structural choice for moments of deep introspection, or when you want the character to linger in a poignant memory. You are forcing the reader to slow down and breathe with the character.
But when you need adrenaline, when the sniper fires or the car crashes...
You shatter the whole notes. You use short, sharp sentences. You use fragments. They act like staccato percussion. They land like visible punches.
Right.
The compilation offers a visceral masterclass in tempo manipulation using a scene from a story called Unspoken. The scene depicts this horrific moment where a tiger attacks a gorilla in a sanctuary.
And the brilliance of the scene is how the author sets the trap. The scene opens incredibly slowly. The author uses these languid, comma-heavy sentences to describe the golden afternoon sunshine, the heavy scent of the gilded spring leaves, the heat baking off the asphalt. The prose is essentially a lullaby.
Right. It is deliberately lulling the reader's nervous system into a state of relaxation. And then the environmental cues shift. The wind picks up, a siren wails faintly in the distance. The tiger crouches.
And as the tension mounts, the author begins ruthlessly chopping the sentence length down. The tempo accelerates, mimicking a quickening pulse, and when the kinetic violence of the attack actually begins, the author strips away all grammar, all complex thought, and relies entirely on raw fragments.
Teeth flashing, claws ripping, blood flowing.
Boom, boom, boom. The punctuation dictates the reader's heart rate, but mastering tempo is only half the equation. The other half is volume.
Yes, and developing writers frequently misunderstand volume. They assume that high-stakes emotional scenes require maximum volume screaming matches, shattered glass, explosive arguments.
But loud prose is essentially sensory assault. It is highly effective for writing a riot or a panic attack or a crowded battlefield. But if a writer keeps the narrative volume dialed up to an 11 for an entire chapter, the reader experiences profound sensory exhaustion.
Master writer understands the devastating power of quiet prose.
There is a stunning example of this in the source material, pulled from a novel called The Fine Art of Insincerity. The protagonist, a woman named Ginger, has just made a world-destroying discovery. Her husband has secretly fathered a child with another woman.
That is an atomic bomb of a revelation.
Right. An amateur writer would instinctively max out the volume. They would write a catastrophic screaming match in the kitchen, throwing porcelain plates at the wall, slamming doors, maximum decibels.
But the author made a much more sophisticated choice here. She placed Ginger in her bedroom, alone, in the dark. The entire scene is constructed of quiet interior monologue. The only external sound in the entire chapter is Ginger lying paralyzed on the mattress, listening to the faint crunch of the gravel in the driveway as her cheating husband's car slowly rolls away into the night.
The volume is dialed down to a near whisper, but the emotional intensity is deafening. A whisper forces the listener to lean in closer to hear it. Sometimes the quietest, most restrained scenes force the reader into the deepest level of intimacy with the character.
Which seamlessly transitions into what the newsletter calls the key change.
Oh, this is great.
Right. If you have ever been to a live concert or a soaring Broadway musical, you know the physiological impact of a key change. The song is building and suddenly the entire composition shifts up a full register.
The audience gets goosebumps. Sometimes they literally stand up and cheer, almost involuntarily. It is a biological reaction to the sudden expansion of the musical landscape.
And writers can absolutely trigger that same involuntary physiological response in prose. We can engineer a standing ovation moment, but it requires supreme restraint.
Let's go back to the tiger attack in Unspoken.
Okay, yeah. So the violence has ended, and the beloved gorilla has just died bleeding in the protagonist's lap. The protagonist is completely shattered by the trauma. Now, a writer who didn't trust their audience might explicitly dictate the emotion. They might write, I sat on the blood-soaked grass and sobbed uncontrollably, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces.
Which is terribly on the nose. It's spoon-feeding. It doesn't invite the reader to experience the grief. It just clinically reports that the character is currently experiencing grief. It shuts the reader out of the emotional loop.
Instead, the author utilized a masterful key change. They wrote, I sat on the grass, numb to everything, as color ran out of the world and the clouds began to weep.
Wow, it's breathtaking. The narrative camera suddenly zooms out from the microscopic trauma to the macroscopic environment. The protagonist is in shock, utterly repressed, incapable of processing the horror. So the author makes the environment bear the weight of the emotion.
The clouds weep.
And because the character is stoically holding the tears back, a psychological vacuum is created on the page. The reader instinctively steps forward to fill that void. The character refuses to cry, so the reader supplies the tears for them.
It is profound emotional manipulation in the best possible sense. But how does a writer sitting alone in a room actually audit their own work to ensure this music is playing correctly? How do you know if your tempo, volume, and cadence are even functioning?
Well, you cannot just read it silently in your head. The voice in your head is frictionless. You have to literally force air through your vocal cords. You must read the manuscript aloud.
When you speak the words, your physical mouth will stumble over a clunky, overwritten phrase that your eyes seamlessly glided past. You will immediately hear what the source calls clanging echoes.
Because the human eye is easily fooled by spelling, but the ear catches phonetic collisions instantly.
The newsletter highlights this with a simple sentence. She stared at him as he went down the stairs. When you look at that on a screen, the words stared and stairs are spelled completely differently. They don't look like a repetition.
But the moment you speak it out loud, the phonetic similarity clangs awkwardly in the air. Stared, stairs. Writing aloud is the ultimate diagnostic tool for rhythm.
But, and this is a massive crucial caveat from the newsletter, reading aloud is the best tool for checking the music of the prose, but it is the absolute worst tool for catching typos or missing words.
Right, because the human brain is the most advanced, aggressive autocorrect software on the planet. Your brain knows what the sentence is supposed to say, so it seamlessly patches over the errors in real time.
If you accidentally typed, she went to the store, your eye will completely ignore the second two, and your mouth will loyally only speak one two. You will read the error 50 times and never see it.
So to audit for accuracy rather than rhythm, you have to bypass the brain's autocorrect entirely. The pro tip here is to use your computer's built-in accessibility features. Turn on the text-to-speech function and force the robotic, digitized computer voice to read your manuscript back to you.
It is a game changer. The computer has zero bias. It doesn't know what you meant to write. It only knows what is literally on the page. If you typed form instead of from, the robotic voice will blatantly say form, and your ear will instantly catch the absurdity of the sentence.
It is an entirely free, perfectly objective proofreader that will save you from deeply embarrassing typographical errors.
Exactly.
All right, so if we execute all of this, if we lock out the judge, build the structural skeleton, and master the cadence of the prose, we have successfully built a mechanism that keeps a reader engaged sentence by sentence. But what keeps them invested chapter by chapter?
Right, the macro level.
What makes them actually care about the human beings inside the story? We are culturally conditioned to believe that the ultimate engine of narrative investment is romance. But Rightwell argues that we are collectively ignoring the most powerful relational tool in the shed.
And this brings us into the secret geometry of relationships.
Mm.
The compilation titles this concept the third thing, or the act of reclaiming friendship in fiction. And the foundational Latin root here is amicable.
Which stems from amicus, meaning friend.
Precisely. To behave amicably is to behave as a friend would. And the deeper am root, signifying love or befriending, is woven throughout our language in fascinating ways. Amity is peaceful harmony. To be enamored is to be struck by love.
Even the word amateur, which we now use dismissively to mean someone who is unskilled, originally meant something beautiful. An amateur is literally someone who does a thing entirely for the love of it, rather than for financial compensation.
And the inverse is equally revealing. The word enemy derives from inamicus, the not friend. Love, or the absence of it, is the defining metric for both concepts.
But the critique the newsletter makes is that modern storytelling, whether in publishing or Hollywood, has severely, almost fatally, narrowed our cultural definition of what love actually is.
To unpack the damage, they bring in the theological and literary frameworks of C.S. Lewis, specifically his 1960 book, The Four Loves.
Right.
Lewis looked back to ancient Greek philosophy to categorize the spectrum of human connection, arguing that we have lost the vocabulary to describe the nuances of love. First, he identifies storge, which translates to familiarity or natural affection.
That's the comfortable love a parent has for a child, or the fondness you feel for an old neighbor you've known for decades. It exists simply because you are geographically or biologically given to each other.
Second is eros, which is romantic, sexual, passionate love. It is the chemical chemistry, the intense gravitational pull between lovers.
Third is agape, which is the highest, most difficult form, divine, sacrificial, unconditional charity toward humanity.
But the fourth category, and the one Lewis believed the modern world has entirely neglected, is philia, the love of profound friendship. This is not just a casual acquaintance. Philia is the deliberate, chosen love between two people who look at each other and consciously decide to stand together against the crushing weight of the world.
Lewis argued that society has forgotten the power of philia, and the consequence of that forgetfulness is everywhere in modern media. Hollywood studios and publishing executives have essentially mandated the collapse of all deep human bonds into eros.
It's everywhere.
If a male and female character share screen time and demonstrate profound care for one another, studio algorithms demand that they must kiss by the end of Act 3. Writers are forced to shoehorn awkward, unbelievable, romantic subplots into narratives where they absolutely do not belong, simply because the industry is terrified that eros is the only type of love that can hold a modern audience's attention.
Which is a historically and demonstrably false premise. If you look at the most enduring, culturally immortal stories in our canon, they're almost never driven by romance.
Right. The Lord of the Rings is not a love story about Aragorn and Arwen. Their romance is a footnote. The emotional epicenter of that entire epic, the bond that makes grown adults weep, is the profound philia between Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee.
Or the Shawshank Redemption. It is entirely anchored by the friendship between Andy and Red.
So if philia is this powerful, why do so many writers struggle to put it on the page? How do we build it correctly? What is the secret geometry of friendship?
Lewis provides a brilliant, incredibly practical visual test to differentiate the two loves. Lovers people driven by eros stand face to face. They are entirely romantically absorbed in each other. The relationship itself is the focal point of their attention.
But friends people driven by philia stand side by side. They are not looking at each other. They are mutually absorbed in a third thing.
The third thing, exactly.
I cannot overstate how much this concept rewired my understanding of character dynamics. If romance is two people sitting at a candlelit table, staring deeply into each other's eyes, then friendship is two people standing shoulder to shoulder, staring intensely at a complex blueprint, trying to figure out how to defuse a ticking bomb before it kills them both.
That is the perfect architectural metaphor. Take the bomb away, and they have nothing to look at. The tension vanishes, and the friendship dissolves into polite small talk. A writer's primary, most difficult job when attempting to forge a compelling friendship on the page is identifying and constructing that third thing.
And once you understand this geometry, you see the pop culture evidence everywhere. Frodo and Sam are not staring lovingly at each other. They are standing side by side, staring in absolute terror at the One Ring and the impossible, agonizing road to Mount Doom. Mount Doom is the third thing.
The entire buddy cop genre relies exclusively on this mechanic. Riggs and Murtaugh in Lethal Weapon don't sit around discussing their feelings for one another. They are looking at the case. The villains in these narratives are not obstacles getting in the way of the friendship. The villains are the necessary occasion for the friendship to exist in the first place.
Or look at Patrick O'Brien's masterful naval novels featuring Captain Aubrey and the spy Maturin. Aubrey looks at naval warfare. Maturin looks at natural history, but their philia is cemented by a shared third thing. They sit side by side and play incredibly complex cello and violin duets. The music is the physical manifestation of their bond.
And this geometric framework perfectly diagnoses why so many friendships in amateur fiction, particularly in genres like inspirational or cozy fiction, feel so stagnant and lifeless. The writer attempts to make the characters themselves the focal point. They try to generate stakes by relying entirely on shared history.
The dialogue is just endless variations of, oh, remember when we met at summer camp 15 years ago?
Which Lewis would accurately categorize as storge familiarity, and affection. Affection is warm and it is pleasant, but it has zero narrative velocity. It cannot drive a plot. You cannot test affection with life or death stakes. If you want a bond to feel weighty, dangerous, and real to a reader, you have to launch it from a shared crucible, not just a shared past.
So if a writer listening to this is staring at their current manuscript and they have two non-romantic characters whose interactions feel completely flat, what is the actionable strategy to fix it?
You must introduce a third thing for them to look at together, a puzzle they must solve, a mutual threat they must survive, a cause they must champion. The newsletter author provides a fantastic, transparent example of this struggle from their own work in progress.
Oh, the Everglades story, right.
Yes. They were writing a novel featuring a billionaire's highly privileged wife named Catherine and a Native American tour guide named Miko, two characters from entirely different socioeconomic universes. The author placed them in the Florida Everglades, surrounded by aggressive Nile crocodiles.
So the immediate assumption is that the crocodiles serve as the third thing, right? Surviving the wilderness together.
Initially, that was the author's intent, but the author realized a critical flaw. Everyone in the story is facing the crocodiles. The threat of being eaten is too universal. It doesn't forge a unique, specific psychological bond between Catherine and Miko. To make the philia authentic, they needed a shared internal crucible that mirrored the external threat.
If the external threat is just a plot device, what was the internal eureka moment that actually bonded them?
The author dug into the character biographies and realized that both of them, for entirely different reasons, had set God on a shelf. Catherine had quietly abandoned her faith because the morality of it couldn't coexist with her husband's ruthless, corrupt, billionaire lifestyle.
And Miko had abandoned his faith because he was drowning in grief after the tragic loss of the two women he loved most.
Suddenly, the geometry shifts. They're standing side by side in the swamp, not just looking at the crocodiles, but looking at this profound, shared devastation of abandoned faith.
That is a massive, incredibly vulnerable third thing.
It changes the entire molecular structure of the dynamic. He stops calling her the formal Mrs. Armstrong, and she stops treating him like the hired help. They are truly bonded.
It taps into that classic, breathtaking moment of realization where one person looks at another and says, "What? You too? I thought I was the only one who felt this way." That is the birth of philia.
Exactly.
All right, so let's step back and look at the whole board. We have covered the internal psychology of giving yourself permission to draft. We have covered the macrostructural skeleton of shaping a life into a story. We have covered the micromusicality of prose and the secret geometry of building compelling human bonds. We have covered everything that goes on the page.
But none of this matters.
Yeah.
Absolutely none of it if the physical human being writing the page falls apart.
Which brings us to the most vital and often most neglected section of the compilation, the writer's reality, or maintaining the mind, body, and soul. And our final Latin root perfectly encapsulates the stakes of this maintenance: vocation.
Derived from vocare, meaning to call.
Yes, a vocation is fundamentally different from a career. You pick a career off a list of pragmatic options to pay your mortgage. A vocation is something that calls to you from outside yourself.
The vocarate is entirely centered around the voice. To advocate is to call out to someone's side in their defense. To evoke is to call a feeling out of the darkness. To revoke is to call something back. For the people who actually survive that 80% attrition rate we talked about in the beginning, writing is not just an industry, and it is certainly not a hobby. It is a calling.
But the reality of living in the modern world is that the noise of daily life can easily drown that calling out. And it is incredibly easy to lose sight of the vocation, especially when we hit the midpoint of the year. The newsletter specifically addresses the psychological danger of the June mid-year slump.
Yeah, that's a tough time for a lot of people.
Right now, a listener might be looking at the calendar and thinking, back in January, I had 5 massive goals for 2026. I was going to finish my novel, query 50 agents, and launch a Substack. It is now July. I have done literally none of them. I'm a failure. I should just write off the entire year, take a break, and try again in 2027.
That is the ultimate psychological trap. The silent internal decision that the year is already lost becomes a toxic permission slip to continue doing nothing. Do not sign that permission slip. You have 6 months left. That is 2 entire financial quarters.
Exactly.
The expert advice the newsletter offers here is wonderfully pragmatic and forgiving. Pick one goal, just one. Take the other 4 goals and physically move them into a folder marked 2027.
Because what can a focused writer actually accomplish in 6 months? Stephen King famously drafted The Running Man in a single week. Robert Louis Stevenson wrote the entire manuscript for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 3 days, threw it into the fireplace because he hated it, and then rewrote the entire thing from scratch in another 3 days.
There is an abundance of time left in the year if you consolidate your focus. But to maintain that intense focus, you have to actively tend the instrument. You have to take care of the three pillars: the mind, the body, and the soul.
Let's start with the mind. The mind is a machine that runs on water, and for a writer, other people's literature is the water. The golden rule is that you cannot output if you do not input.
Stephen King notoriously reads roughly 70 books a year while maintaining his own massive writing schedule. And crucially, you have to read far outside your own chosen genre.
Because if you only read the sci-fi thrillers that sit on the exact same shelf you want to be on, you are just going to end up writing a pale, regurgitated imitation of your peers. Your prose will become an echo chamber.
You have to feed the mind alien concepts to force neuroplasticity. Read ancient poetry to train your ear for cadence and rhythm. Read obscure history books to find bizarre plot complications. Read dead writers who cannot disappoint you on social media. The mind has to be aggressively and diversely fed.
But then we get to the body. And writers are notoriously parable at this. There is a striking visual described in the source material that really violently shatters the romantic myth of the writer. It's a photograph of an author working at a specialized treadmill desk.
Oh, I love that image.
He is physically walking at a steady pace on a treadmill while simultaneously typing on an elevated keyboard, staring at a monitor. And taped to the monitor is a crude sticky note that just says in bold letters, "Words, ideas, discipline, coffee."
That image is fantastic because it validates a truth that most creatives want to desperately ignore. Writing is a grueling, intensely physical job.
Yes. We have this pervasive cultural delusion that writing happens entirely in the ether of the mind, but the mind relies exclusively on a physical vessel. You're using your hands, your back, your eyes, and a biological brain that requires massive amounts of oxygen, protein, and sleep to solve complex narrative puzzles.
We cling to this romanticized, Hemingway-esque notion of the writer hunched over a typewriter in a dark, smoky room with a bottle of whiskey, remaining completely stationary for 12 hours. But if you look at the historical precedent of highly prolific geniuses, the secret weapon is walking.
Absolutely. Charles Dickens was famous for his manic, 20-mile daily walks through the streets of London. He claimed he couldn't write without them.
Contemporary masters like Anne Lamott are vocal about doing their best structural thinking on foot. The physiological mechanics of walking are actually a writing tool. The physical exertion occupies the anxious, conscious mind, which allows the subconscious mind to freely untangle plot holes in the background. If you are paralyzed at the desk, the worst thing you can do is stare harder at the screen. Step away from the desk and move your physical body.
And the ultimate physical tool, sleep. Hustle culture tells us that sleep is time stolen from writing. I'll sleep when I'm dead, I'm burning the midnight oil. But neurologically, sleep is a mandatory phase of the writing process. How many times have you been staring at a broken chapter at 1 a.m., totally blocked, convinced you were a hack, and then you finally surrender, go to sleep, and when you wake up at 7 a.m., the exact sentence you knitted is just effortlessly floating in your brain?
The brain uses the REM cycle to consolidate the chaotic data of the day. It runs the simulations while you are unconscious. If your physical body is breaking down, if you have developed carpal tunnel syndrome, terrible thoracic posture, and chronic sleep deprivation, the music stops. The vocation ends. The book simply does not get written.
Which leaves the final, most delicate piece of the entire ecosystem, the soul. The soul is the part of you that knew you were going to be a writer long before anyone else did. It's the echo of that 7-year-old playing with dolls, making up stories just for the pure, unadulterated joy of world building. And the newsletter poses the ultimate, ruthless litmus test for the health of a writer's soul.
It asks one devastating question. If you knew for an absolute, guaranteed fact that no other human being would ever read a single word of what you wrote, would you still write it?
That is heavy. That strips away all the armor.
It completely annihilates the ego. It strips away the algorithm, the desperate pursuit of a traditional publishing contract, the Amazon sales ranks, the bitter rejection letters, the desire for fame. If the honest answer to that question is yes, then you are a writer in the deepest, truest sense of the vocation. You are writing because the internal river simply demands to flow. You have to actively reconnect with that pure, unburdened version of yourself to survive the friction of the industry.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. The journey of this deep dive has taken us through the complete anatomy of the writing life. We learned that to get the draft done, you have to ruthlessly lock the internal judge out of the room and let the childlike creator play in the sand.
We learned that a life lived is merely a situation, and it doesn't become a story until you achieve the retrospective distance required to extract the universal meaning.
We learned how to conduct our prose like a symphony, manipulating tempo, volume, and environmental key changes to physically move the reader's heart rate and to outsmart our own autocorrecting brains by letting a computer read our work aloud.
We learned that the secret geometry of philia, or true friendship, is an incredibly powerful narrative engine, provided we give our characters a profound third thing to face together, side by side.
And we learned that the writer is not just a brain in a jar, but a physical organism that must feed its mind, move its body, and fiercely protect its soul from the noise of the industry.
The desk is patient. It does not judge your absence. It is still there, waiting for you to return to the work.
And that brings us full circle to the driving mission of this entire discussion. Breaking into professional writing and actually making a sustainable living at this is a brutal war of attrition. 80% of people will quit because they don't have the tools to survive the friction. You do not have to be one of them. The Write Well Wintley newsletter isn't just theory. It is designed to deliver exactly these kinds of deep, actionable frameworks, insider strategies, and psychological lifelines straight to your inbox every single week. I urge you to subscribe. Use the tools. Keep your edge. Keep earning and keep writing. Don't let the dream slip away.
The frameworks for success have been laid out. The only thing left is the application.
Exactly. And so, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over when this audio ends. Think back to that x-ray we talked about at the very beginning. The desperate human desire for things to be clean, visible, and externally validated. I want you to strip all of that messy external pressure away. If your external editor, your harshest Goodreads critics, your sales metrics, and your entire potential audience were entirely erased from existence tomorrow, what is the very first sentence you would sit down to write, just for the sheer, unadulterated joy of it?
Go write that sentence.
Go write that sentence.